Hey, welcome to the Hex Ruin guide. So, I kinda thought this guide would be a good idea, seeing as how Hex Ruin is part of the current meta in Dead by Daylight. I'm sure everyone has by now noticed that every second killer is running it, and as a killer you are probably also running this perk as well. And this is essentially because when broken down, Dead by Daylight is a game all about time. The more time you spend in the game, the more time you have as a killer to chase down the survivors before they escape. In this guide I'm going to do a voiceover because there's going to be a lot of information to explain. So, in this guide, I'm going to cover the Hex Ruin mechanics, so how does Hex Ruin actually work and what does it do. After that, I'll start mentioning some basic generator mechanics, and that's because Hex Ruin and the generator is intertwined. In order to understand Hex Ruin, you will also need to understand how the generator works. After that, I'll start mentioning some items and perks influence on Hex Ruin, so this will include something like Thanaphobia, Leader, Dying Light, and Toolboxes. And after that, I will cover some tactics and strategies for and against Hex Ruin, both as killer and survivors, at least to the best of my knowledge. And just to quickly mention again, this is more of a theory guide with numbers. Hex Ruin is a perk that slows down the game. It's a totem perk, making it a high risk and high reward perk, or so it is intended. So the reason why it's a high risk perk is because the survivor can actually find this totem and cleanse and destroy it. Also because sometimes it'll actually spawn right next to it. So the reason why it's a high reward perk is because it can actually significantly slow down the game. Be that because the survivors are working in the gen trying to power through it, or because they're trying to spend ages trying to find it. So, when working on a generator and hitting a good skill check, the generator will be digressed by 5%, which is 4 charges of 4 seconds, and is half of an actual generator explosion. The killer will not be notified of this digression unlike an actual generator explosion. After missing the skill check, there's an additional 3 seconds where the generator cannot receive any progress whatsoever. Even if you have a brand new pod, the progression will still be 0%. It affects everyone working on the gen. Hitting a great skill check will provide 0% progression but won't give any regression either. So those are just the basic mechanics of the Ruin perk. Now to some basic generator mechanics, which is going to lead up to the tactics. So a normal generator takes 80 seconds or 80 charges as shown in the chart to the right. This chart is from the official wiki page and I've actually double checked these numbers and they all seem to be quite fine. A normal survivor repairing a gen will do 1 charge per second. If you're more survivors working on a gen, you will do the gen faster, but overall you will actually lose charges per second. Meaning that if 2 people for instance split up and do the gens individually, they will do those gens faster than the 2 people working on one gen at one time. So, as you can see from this chart, the more survivors you work on gen, the more overall time you lose. So I'm quickly gonna explain these numbers. So the charges go down by 0.1 for each survivor working on a gen, meaning that if you have 2 survivors, you will actually overall lose 8.8 seconds. If you have 3 survivors, you will overall lose 19.99 seconds. And if you have 4 survivors, you will lose 34.28 seconds. So you might ask yourself like, well, why does this make sense from a design perspective? Because it kind of does discourage teamwork and grouping up. But this was done early in the day to balance out gen rushing as it was really strong when the game came out. There actually never used to be a penalty for working on gens together. Okay, so now a quick one to explain how skill checks works. And this is because they're quite intertwined with how Ruin also works. Each time that you spend 1 second on the gen, you have an 8% chance of getting a skill check. A great skill check on the gen will provide 1.2 charges of 1.2 seconds progression on the gen. So as one survivor working on a gen, you'll be getting 6.4 skill checks in average. Because Ruin works best when the player is given more skill checks, it is not advised to group up survivors and working on a gen together, since you'll be getting more skill checks overall. So for 2 people, you'll be getting 7.11 skill checks. For 3 people, you'll be getting 7.99 skill checks, and for 4 people, you'll be actually getting 9.14 skill checks. I mentioned before that after missing a skill check, there's 3 seconds of time where no progression can be done whatsoever. Now, if you continue to work on the gen for those 3 seconds, you will be giving yourself a free 22.30% chance of getting a skill check. It is therefore smart to stop working on a gen for those extra 3 seconds. As mentioned, those 3 seconds also counts for your teammates, so if you're 3 people working on a gen and 1 person misses a skill check, that's 3 plus 2 times 3 additional seconds wasted. and if those people continue to work on the gen while the 3 seconds cooldown is active, that's an additional 52.78% chance of getting a new skill set straight after the cooldown. So, the toolbox might at first seem like a good option for dealing with Hex Ruin, else you'll be able to do the generators faster and thus lowering your chance of getting skill techs. However, in patch 1.8.0, the chance of getting a skill tech for toolboxes was increased from 8 to 10.5%. Now normally this will be a buff as you'll be getting more great skill techs and thus you'll be able to speed up the gen speed, but in terms of dealing with Hex Ruin, it's actually a nerf. Here's a chart displaying all the different toolbox speeds from Wikipedia. I have done a stick samples on these values and they do actually seem to be true. Even with the fastest toolbox at 64 seconds, you will get an average of 6.72 skill techs in comparison to a normal 6.4. However, if you equip Engineer's Toolbox with Sucker Swirl and Clean Rack, you can get the gen speed up to about 54 seconds, which gives you an average of 5.67 skill checks, which is lower than the normal value. If you bring in a toolbox and encounter Ruin, you could actually wait for the Ruin to get destroyed and after that start using your toolbox. If you're a killer and you see a toolbox or several toolboxes in the lobby, you could bring in Hex Ruin to make them less effective. In terms of add-ons for the toolbox, there's also Grip Wrench and Spring Clamp. However, these two add-ons only increase the good skill check success zone and not the Great Done, thus making these two completely useless in dealing with Hex Ruin. When mentioning the toolbox, the brand new part also has to be mentioned because it also has an influence on an interaction with Ruin. So I'm quickly gonna sum up what the brand new part does. So the brand new part will trigger a skill check every second until the generator is repaired or the interaction ends. Good skill checks will grant 5% total generator progression, and great skill checks will grant 10% total generator progression. Completing the repair, interrupting the action, or failing a skill check will consume the toolbox and all these add-ons. So, in terms of interaction with Ruin, hitting good skill checks will provide 5% regression just like normal. Hitting a great skill check will give 10% progression as if Ruin doesn't exist. If you hit a good skill check and then straight after hitting a great skill check, the progression will be 0% because of the 3 seconds cooldown. So, Ruin can provide extra time against brand new pod if the survivors are not good at hitting their skill checks. Enough so that the killer might be able to patrol the gens faster and stop the brand new pod from being used. On the contrary, if the survivor is good at hitting the skill checks, they can simply power through the Ruin in no time. So now I want to move over to some perks and their influence on Hex Ruin. I want to start with the survivors perks, and I want to start with the perk leader here. So the reason why I've chosen leader is because it can actually decrease the amount of time when working on generators and thus lowering the chance of you getting skill checks, which is good against Ruin. So I have calculated the numbers on Ruin, and I've also tested some of them in game, and once I showcase these numbers, it's up to you as a player to value whether it's worth running leader or not. To me, running leader is not worth it until the actual overall speed goes below 80 seconds, but that's up for you to judge. If you're two people working on a gen and you're both running leader, the overall gen time will be 82.29 seconds, and that will give you an average of 6.58 skill checks, and the actual gen time will be 41.15 seconds. If you're 3 people working on a gen and 2 of you are running leader, the overall gen time will now be 86.19 seconds, and that will give you 6.68 skill checks in average. And the actual gen time will be 28.73 seconds. Now here comes the interesting part. If you're 3 people working on a gen and you're 3 people running leader, the actual gen time will go below the average 80 to 73.52 seconds, and you will now only be getting 5.88 skill checks. And the actual gen time will be 24.5 seconds. And in my opinion, this is when it becomes worth running leader against Hex Ruin. You can also run Proof Thyself, but to me that is essentially a worse version of leader. You can also run Resilience, and this is not happening. Resilience increases the repair speed by 10%, which is like the equivalent of a yellow or brown toolbox. This is not happening, increases the great skill check success zone by 30%. You can run these perks with no meter, but I wouldn't recommend that as no meter is way too inflexible and comes with way too many disadvantages. Instead, when you get injured and escape the killer, heal to about 99% and start repairing the gen. If the situation calls for it, simply heal up in an instant. So now I want to move over to some killer perks, and I'll be talking about perks such as Thanaphobia, Unnerving Presence, Hex Lullaby, Overcharge, and Dying Light. All these perks can make Hex Ruin better, and some more than others. Thanaphobia can be a good perk to complement Hex Ruin, since Thanaphobia increases time spent on the gens. Here are the values that I've calculated. So, I haven't actually calculated values for 2 people working on a gen while injured, as that scenario is very unlikely to happen at the moment. Survivors will simply heal up in most cases, unless they're running something like no meter, which is you shouldn't be running that. You should be running it. On top of that, it's also super hard calculating stacking percentages with Thanaphobia and multiple people working on the gen. Okay, so next perk up is Unnerving Presence. Unnerving Presence is also an option as it increases the amount of skill checks the survivors get, and it also reduces the skill check success zone as well. Here are the calculated numbers for Unnerving Presence. So the reason why Unnerving Presence is good in my opinion is not so much because of the increased skill check chance, as if you calculated the values are not actually that high, but it's more to do with the zone reduction. On top of that, Unnerving Presence was recently buffed, and I quickly want to mention that Unnerving Presence will prioritize the good skill check success zone over the great one in terms of reducing the zone. So if you have the zone, the good skill check success zone will be depleted first or taken away before the great one. Hex Lullaby is another good option for supporting Hex Ruin. If you, as a survivor, misses a skill check, the regression penalty is 6%, which is 4.8 charges or 4.8 seconds for a single survivor working on a gen. Hex Lullaby also makes it harder for survivors to hit their skill checks, as you as a killer keep acquiring more and more stacks. So the reason for this is because the audio queue keeps getting further away from the actual skill check. It can however be problematic trying to defend 2 totems at once, so keep this in mind if you choose this perk. Overcharge is another perk for supporting Hex Ruin. Once you as a killer have digressed the gen by hitting it, the survivor will be faced with a tremendously difficult skill check, and if he fails his skill check, he will get a 5% regression, which is 4 charges or 4 seconds, plus the additional 3 seconds cooldown. So again, the more time you get in the game, the better it is for Ruin. So next up is Dying Light, and it's probably the best one of them all, if you can make it work. So Dying Light gives a penalty of 25% to repair speed, healing, and sabotage speed. So here are the calculated values for Dying Light. So if you get this going early in the game, this should be a definitely win, as you can see by the numbers. The skill checks and the overall time is absolutely insane.